He adjusted the silk lapels of his Tom Ford tuxedo, a smug smile playing on his lips. Tonight was his coronation. At his side, his girlfriend, a woman half his age and dressed in shimmering gold, was the perfect accessory. He had everything: the success, the recognition, and the beautiful woman. The ghost of his plain, boring ex-wife was a distant memory, a footnote in his triumphant biography. But what he didn't know was that in less than 30 minutes, that ghost wasn't just going to walk back into his life, she was going to buy the entire stage he was standing on, and in front of the whole world reveal that his success was built on the one thing he threw away. His downfall would be televised. The grand ballroom of the New York Marriott Marquis was a galaxy of manufactured stars. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and couture gowns. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition, buzzed with the low hum of powerful people making powerful connections. And at the center of his own solar system, basking in the gravitational pull of his recent success, was Jonathan Davenport. At 45, Jonathan was the picture of self-made triumph. His company, Davenport Urban Developments, had reshaped a significant portion of the Brooklyn skyline. He didn't just build buildings, he built narratives, transforming derelict warehouses into luxury lofts that sold for 8 figures. He was handsome in a way that suggested money, a sharp jawline maintained by a personal trainer, teeth whitened to a blinding perfection, and a tan that spoke of impromptu trips to St. Bart's, not a bottle. Clinging to his arm was Isabella Rossi, 24, with wide dark eyes and a figure that seemed poured into her sequined backless dress. She was an Instagram model with 2 million followers and an uncomplicated view of the world. She adored Jonathan, or rather she adored the world he provided. The private jets, the front row seats at Fashion Week, the casual way he'd say pick something out in any store on Fifth Avenue. She was his living, breathing trophy proof that he had not just arrived, but conquered. "Isn't this incredible, Johnny?" she whispered, her voice a breathy purr. She squeezed his arm, her long nails a vibrant red against his crisp white shirt. "Everyone is looking at you." Jonathan's smile widened. He scanned the room, nodding curtly at familiar faces, bankers who'd financed his projects, city officials who'd smoothed the path of zoning permits, rivals who watched him with a bitter cocktail of envy and resentment. "They're not just looking, Bella," he corrected her gently. "They're witnessing. Tonight they hand me the Innovator of the Year award. It's a formality, really. The Hudson Yards West project sealed it." The Hudson Yards West project was his masterpiece. A sprawling complex of residential towers, commercial space, and green tech integration that was being hailed as the future of urban living. It was ambitious, audacious, and had put him on the cover of Forbes. A portly man with a florid face, Robert Coleman of Coleman Holdings, clapped Jonathan on the shoulder. "Davenport, you magnificent bastard. Heard you're the shoe-in tonight. Drinks on you after, right?" "Only the best, Robert." Jonathan laughed, a smooth, practiced sound. As Robert moved on, Isabella nestled closer. "He seems sweaty." She wrinkled her nose. "He's old money, darling. They're allowed to be," Jonathan said dismissively. "They inherit it. We earn it. There's a difference." That "we" felt good. It was a royal "we." The "we" of a man who had clawed his way to the top. His mind, for a fleeting, unbidden moment, drifted back to a different "we." A "we" that felt like a lifetime ago. A "we" that included Catherine Miller, his ex-wife. The thought of her now was like looking at a faded black and white photograph. Plain Catherine, with her perpetually messy bun, her sensible shoes, and her worn-out cardigans. The woman who would pack his lunches when he was starting out, who would proofread his business proposals until 2 a.m. Her brow furrowed in concentration. The woman who believed in him when he was nothing more than a junior architect with delusions of grandeur. He remembered her in their small, cramped apartment in Queens, surrounded by books and beakers. She was a scientist, a chemist to be precise. She was always tinkering with what he called her little projects. Her passion was what? It's the essence of everything, John. She'd say, her eyes alight with a fire he found perplexing. Imagine if we could purify any water source affordably, sustainably. It would change the world. He'd patronized her, of course. That's nice, honey. Just make sure those chemicals don't stain the carpet. To him, her work was a quaint hobby, a distraction from her real job, which was supporting his dream. He was the star, the visionary. She was the stage crew, the quiet, unseen support system. The divorce had been his idea naturally. As his star began to rise, Catherine had started to feel inadequate. She didn't fit in at the galas and the yacht parties. She'd rather spend a Saturday at a science symposium than a charity auction. She was an anchor, holding him back from the stratosphere. The split was in his mind, mercifully swift. He was generous, he told himself. He gave her the house, the modest suburban house they'd bought, not the penthouse he now called home, and a settlement he considered more than fair for a woman with no real earning potential. She hadn't fought him. She'd just looked at him with a quiet, unreadable sadness, signed the papers, and disappeared from his life. That was 5 years ago. He hadn't heard a word from or about her since, and he preferred it that way. "What are you thinking about?" Isabella's voice pulled him back to the glittering present. "You have that funny look on your face." "Just closing a chapter?" he said, taking a sip of his champagne. The bubbles fizzed on his tongue, a taste of pure victory. He looked at Isabella, so vibrant and present, the perfect symbol of his new life. "The best decision I ever made." He guided her towards their designated table, front and center, a position befitting the night's presumed victor. The lights began to dim, and a hush fell over the crowd. The host, a well-known comedian, walked onto the stage, and the 8th Annual Global Innovators Gala began. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, draping an arm over the back of Isabella's. He felt a profound sense of rightness, of destiny fulfilled. Every decision, every sacrifice, every person he'd left behind, it had all been worth it to get to this very moment. He was Jonathan Davenport, Innovator of the Year. He was untouchable. In the gilded ballroom, surrounded by the powerful and the beautiful, he felt like a king in his court, utterly oblivious to the guillotine being polished just off stage. The first half of the ceremony unfolded exactly as Jonathan had predicted. A tedious parade of awards for esoteric achievements in biotechnology and software engineering went to people who, in Jonathan's opinion, looked like they still lived in their parents' basements. He clapped politely, exchanged witty asides with Isabella, and accepted congratulations from a steady stream of well-wishers who stopped by his table. "It's just a matter of time, Johnny," Isabella whispered, scrolling through her phone, likely posting a selfie of them with the hashtag #PowerCouple. "Patience, darling," he murmured, though his own was wearing thin. He wanted his trophy. He wanted the validation, the applause, the final official confirmation of his status. A strange lull fell over the proceedings after the Humanitarian of the Year award was presented. The host returned to the stage, looking at his teleprompter with a flicker of genuine surprise. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the host began, his tone shifting from jovial to reverent, "we come to a very special part of the evening. As some of you may know, this year's Global Innovators Gala was in jeopardy. Our primary corporate sponsor pulled out at the last minute due to, well, let's call it market volatility." A murmur rippled through the audience. Jonathan knew this, of course. He'd heard the rumors. It had nearly caused a major scandal. "It seemed we might have to cancel," the host continued, "which would have been a tragedy, denying all these brilliant minds their much-deserved recognition. But then at the 11th hour, a new benefactor stepped forward, a private entity that not only matched the original sponsorship, but doubled it with one condition: anonymity. Until tonight." The intrigue in the room was palpable. Even Isabella looked up from her phone. Jonathan was mildly curious. It had to be one of the old guard tech billionaires, a Gates or a Bezos perhaps, engaging in some quiet philanthropy. This sponsor believed so deeply in the power of innovation in celebrating the people who are truly changing our world for the better that they ensured this night would happen, and with more resources than ever before. The host announced, his voice booming. Tonight, we are honored to finally reveal and thank the company that made it all possible. The massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing the gala's logo, flickered to life. A sleek, minimalist animation began a single drop of water falling into a still pool, sending out brilliant, clean blue ripples. Then a name materialized in elegant silver typography, Aqua Veritas Technologies. Jonathan frowned. The name meant nothing to him. He glanced around. Other faces showed similar confusion. It wasn't a household name like Google or Apple. It wasn't a Wall Street behemoth like Goldman Sachs. Aqua Veritas Technologies, the host repeated, letting the name hang in the air. For those of you not yet familiar with them, and I assure you, you will be, they are the company behind the revolutionary H2 Onyx filtration system, a technology poised to solve the global water crisis. A knot of unease tightened in Jonathan's stomach. Water. The word echoed in his memory, spoken in a voice he hadn't heard in 5 years. It's the essence of everything, John. He pushed the thought away. It was a coincidence. A ridiculous, paranoid coincidence. Miller was a common name. Catherine was a common name, and she was a lab chemist, not the CEO of a major tech firm. She was probably still in that suburban house, tinkering with her test tubes and wondering what could have been. Tonight, the host's voice swelled with importance. The founder and CEO of Aqua Veritas Technologies has graced us with her presence to say a few words. She is a true visionary, a testament to the fact that the most brilliant ideas can come from the quietest corners, and a powerful example of what can be achieved when potential is finally unleashed. Jonathan's heart began to hammer against his ribs. A cold dread, slick and oily, started to creep up his spine. It couldn't be. It was impossible. He felt Isabella's hand on his arm. "Johnny, are you okay? You've gone completely pale." He couldn't answer. His eyes were glued to the stage, to the wing from which the host was gesturing. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and give a monumental welcome to the brilliant mind behind Aqua Veritas, the woman who saved this gala, Ms. Catherine Miller." The name hit the room like a sonic boom. For most, it was just a name. But for Jonathan Davenport, it was a ghost story made real. Time seemed to slow down. He saw the name Catherine Miller flash on the screens. He felt the entire room shift as thousands of people got to their feet, their applause thundering in his ears. He, however, remained frozen in his seat, a statue of disbelief. And then she walked out. It was Catherine, but it wasn't. The woman who emerged from the wings was not the mousy, cardigan-wearing woman from his memory. This Catherine stood tall and poised in a tailored midnight blue Armani gown that was the epitome of understated elegance. Her hair was no longer in a messy bun, but styled in a chic, sophisticated cut that framed a face that was glowing. She wasn't wearing much makeup, just enough to highlight the sharp intelligence in her eyes and the confident curve of her lips. She moved with a liquid grace he'd never seen before, an aura of quiet, unshakable authority surrounding her. She wasn't just a different person, she was from a different world. A world where she was the one on stage and he was the one in the crowd. Isabella, still standing, looked from the woman on stage back down to Jonathan's ashen face. Confusion warred with dawning suspicion in her eyes. "Johnny Miller, as in your ex-wife, Catherine Miller," she whispered, her voice sharp with disbelief. Jonathan couldn't form words. He could only watch as his plain, boring ex-wife, the woman he had discarded like a rough draft, walked into the spotlight. The applause grew louder, a deafening roar of approval for the billionaire sponsor, for the visionary CEO, for Catherine. And in that moment, Jonathan Davenport knew this wasn't his coronation. It was his execution, and the whole world was watching. The applause was a physical force, a wave of sound that seemed to press Jonathan deeper into his chair. He felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on him, or maybe it was just his paranoia. People were clapping for her, but they were starting to connect the dots. The whispers started, like the rustling of leaves, a subtle change in the room's atmosphere. He could almost hear them. Davenport. Wasn't his ex-wife's name Catherine? My God, is that her? Isabella finally sank back into her seat, her perfectly made-up face a mask of bewilderment. That's her. That's Catherine. The way she said it was an accusation. He had described his ex-wife as a frumpy, uninspired homebody. The woman on that stage was a titan. On stage, Catherine approached the podium. She smiled a calm, genuine smile that reached her eyes, and the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. She wasn't just a sponsor, she was the main event. She leaned into the microphone, and her voice, clear and steady, filled the vast space. It was the same voice that used to ask him if he wanted coffee, but now it held a resonance, a weight that commanded absolute attention. Thank you. She began, her gaze sweeping across the room. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, her eyes met Jonathan's. There was no hatred in them, no anger, just a flicker of something that looked like recognition, acknowledgement. And then she moved on, dismissing him as easily as she would a piece of furniture. That more than any glare was what made his blood run cold. It's a genuine honor to be here, Catherine continued. To be in a room filled with so many people dedicated to pushing the boundaries of what's possible. For years I worked on my own project, often in solitude. People close to me saw it as a hobby, a little distraction. A nervous cough escaped Jonathan's lips. It was a cannon shot in the silent room. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and he was the bullseye. They couldn't see the vision, she went on, her tone even almost philosophical. They saw beakers and formulas and thought it was quaint. They didn't understand that true innovation isn't always loud. It doesn't always come in a shiny package. Sometimes it's born from quiet persistence, from believing in an idea when no one else does, from understanding that the most valuable assets we have are the ones that are often overlooked. Isabella was staring at him now, her mouth slightly agape. The pieces were clicking into place for her, forming a picture of him that was deeply unflattering. He was the one who couldn't see. He was the one who had overlooked this powerhouse. Aqua Veritas was founded on a simple principle, Catherine said, her voice gaining strength, that access to clean water is a fundamental human right, not a luxury, and that the solution shouldn't come at the cost of our planet. She went on to briefly, brilliantly explain her H2 Onyx technology, a self-sustaining carbon-neutral filtration system using nanotechnology she had developed. It was complex, elegant, and revolutionary. It was the kind of world-changing idea he claimed to champion, and he had literally slept next to it for a decade and called it a hobby. My journey to this stage was not a straight line, she said, nearing her conclusion. It was filled with moments of profound doubt. It required me to shed old skins, to walk away from situations that no longer served my growth, and to sever ties that were holding my potential captive. Her eyes once again did a slow, deliberate sweep of the room. This time, they did not stop on him. It was worse. They passed right over him as if he wasn't even there. So, to every innovator in this room, she finished, her voice ringing with passion, especially those of you who feel unseen, who are told, your dreams are just hobbies. Do not let anyone define your worth. Do not let anyone else's lack of vision limit your own. Your quiet corner might just be the laboratory for the next great revolution. Thank you. The ballroom erupted. It wasn't just applause now. It was a standing ovation, thunderous and sustained. People were on their feet, not out of obligation, but out of genuine awe. They were cheering for her story as much as her success. The story of the underestimated woman who had quietly built an empire. Jonathan felt sick. The champagne in his stomach churned. He looked at the faces of his colleagues, his rivals. He saw Robert Coleman staring at him with a newfound pitying curiosity. He saw the gleam of schadenfreude in the eyes of his competitors. His brand, his carefully constructed image of the infallible visionary, was shattering in real time. He was the fool in her story, the man with the lack of vision, the tie that had to be severed. She hadn't mentioned his name. She didn't have to. As the applause slowly died down, Catherine was escorted from the stage, not back into the wings, but towards a table of honor situated even more prominently than Jonathan's. As she passed a throng of people, CEOs, venture capitalists, journalists, descended upon her, a swarm of bees to a new queen. The host returned to the stage, looking slightly dazed by the sheer power of the moment he had just witnessed. Wow. Just wow. Let's all take a moment. Ms. Catherine Miller, ladies and gentlemen. Aqua Veritas Technologies. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control of his show. And now, the award for Innovator of the Year. Jonathan's award, the reason he was here, the culmination of his life's work. But it felt like ashes in his mouth now. The trophy was a trinket compared to the display of power he had just witnessed. The screen lit up with the nominees. His face smiling and confident in a professionally shot photo appeared next to 3 others. Below his name, it listed his crowning achievement, Hudson Yards West. And the Innovator of the Year is... The host ripped open the envelope. Jonathan held his breath, a desperate final prayer on his lips. Maybe he could still salvage this. If he won, it would be something. A victory to stanch the bleeding. Michael Chen for the Terraform Project. A polite smattering of applause. A different table erupted in cheers. Michael Chen, a young developer known for his radical focus on sustainable, zero-carbon footprint buildings, walked to the stage. Jonathan just stared. He had lost. He had lost the award, and he had lost the entire night. He looked over at Catherine's table. She was engaged in an animated conversation with the mayor of New York. She hadn't even looked over to see who won. The result was utterly irrelevant to her. Johnny, Isabella's voice was cold, stripped of all its earlier warmth. What did you do? He turned to her. The adoration was gone from her eyes, replaced by a hard, calculating glint. She wasn't looking at her boyfriend anymore. She was looking at a bad investment. It's complicated, he stammered, his mind a whirlwind of panic and humiliation. It doesn't seem complicated at all, she said, her voice low and sharp. You told me she was nothing, a nobody. You left a billionaire, Jonathan. A self-made billionaire. How stupid are you? She didn't wait for an answer. Isabella Rossi stood up, smoothed down her gold dress, picked up her tiny, ridiculously expensive clutch, and walked away from the table without a backward glance. She didn't leave the gala. Jonathan watched in horror as she made a beeline for the bar, where she would no doubt begin networking, detaching herself from his sinking ship with the ruthless efficiency of a born survivor. He was alone at the center table, a king dethroned in an empty court. The music swelled. The ceremony continued, but for Jonathan Davenport, the world had gone silent. There was only the roaring in his ears and the image of Catherine, bathed in light, a universe away. The rest of the gala was a blur of exquisite torture. Jonathan sat through the remaining awards, his posture rigid, his face a carefully constructed mask of indifference. He felt the weight of hundreds of glances, the quick, averted eyes, the stifled whispers. He was no longer the man to know. He was the knight's cautionary tale. The food, a masterfully prepared filet mignon, sat untouched on his plate, looking like a bloody sacrifice. He had to get out, but fleeing would be an admission of defeat. He had to brazen it out, pretend that none of it mattered. He nursed a single glass of whiskey, the amber liquid doing nothing to warm the ice that had formed in his veins. His phone, which had been buzzing intermittently all evening with messages of "good luck" and "you've got this," was now ominously silent. No, that wasn't true. It did buzz once. A text from his head of PR, a piranha named Jessica. "We have a problem, a big one. Call me ASAP." He ignored it. What could Jessica possibly say? How could she spin this local developer's billionaire ex-wife steal show, reminds world he's an idiot? The ceremony finally ended. As the lights came up, the crowd began to move to mingle. This was the moment he dreaded, the post-mortem. He stood up, forcing a casual air he was nowhere near feeling, and planned his escape route to the exit. But it was not to be. "Jonathan." The voice was calm and male. He turned to see Arthur Vance, a senior partner at the law firm that handled all of Davenport Urban Development's major contracts. Arthur was a man whose face was a permanent ledger of calculated risks and billable hours. "Arthur?" Jonathan managed extending a hand that felt clammy. Arthur shook it briefly, his grip limp. His eyes weren't focused on Jonathan, but were darting over his shoulder towards the gravitational center of the room, where Catherine was holding court. "Remarkable evening," Arthur said, his tone noncommittal. "Quite the revelation." "Yes, quite a surprise," Jonathan said, trying to sound amused. "Who knew?" Arthur's gaze finally settled on Jonathan, and it was cold. "Some of us did. The whispers about Aqua Veritas have been circulating in certain financial circles for months. The valuation is staggering. We just didn't know the face behind it. The connection to you, well, it complicates things. Complicates what my divorce was 5 years ago. It has nothing to do with my business." "Doesn't it?" Arthur raised a skeptical eyebrow. "The Hudson Yards West project, your flagship. Phase 2 requires a comprehensive water reclamation and sustainability plan to get final city approval. A plan we haven't been able to finalize because the available technology is either too expensive or doesn't meet the new green energy mandates." Jonathan felt a new, more specific dread begin to dawn. "Go on." "The mayor is here tonight, Jonathan, and for the last 20 minutes, he's been in a very animated discussion with Ms. Miller. The city is desperate for a high-profile green partnership. Aqua Veritas is precisely that. Their technology is the only one on the market that exceeds the new mandate's requirements." The puzzle pieces snapped together with a horrifying click. The award he lost to a sustainable developer, the mayor's presence, Catherine's targeted speech. This wasn't just a personal humiliation. This was a strategic business maneuver. "She wouldn't," Jonathan breathed. "It's my project." "Is it?" Arthur replied, his voice flat. "Or is it a city contract that's about to have a new, very specific requirement for a key vendor? A vendor who I imagine might not be inclined to do business with you. I'll be in touch with your office on Monday to discuss damage control, if there is any." Arthur gave a curt nod and walked away, melting into the crowd that was now flocking toward Catherine. He was abandoning a sinking ship. Defeated, Jonathan turned to leave. He just wanted to disappear. But as he neared the grand marble entryway, his path was blocked. Not by a person, but by an aura. Catherine was standing near the coat check, speaking quietly with a distinguished-looking older man. For a moment she was free. The crowd around her had thinned. This was his chance. He didn't know what he would say. Apologize. Congratulate her scream. He just knew he had to face her. He took a step forward. "Catherine." She turned. The older man gave Jonathan a dismissive glance and took a respectful step back, giving them space. Up close, the transformation was even more striking. The lines of fatigue he remembered around her eyes were gone, replaced by the clear-eyed confidence of a leader. She looked at him, her expression perfectly neutral. "Jonathan," she acknowledged him. Her voice was level, betraying no emotion. It was the voice you would use for a stranger who had asked for the time. I I had no idea, he stammered, feeling like a schoolboy. Congratulations. It's incredible what you've done. Thank you, she said simply. There was no I couldn't have done it without our past, or this is for us. Just a polite final acceptance of his compliment. Listen, Cat, he began foolishly, using his old pet name for her. She visibly flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. About the Hudson Yards project. I don't discuss business at social events. She cut him off, her voice turning sharp and cold as ice. You, of all people, should know that I believe in keeping personal and professional matters separate. The irony was so thick he could have choked on it. He, who had brought his mistress to a business gala, was being lectured on professionalism by the ex-wife he had deemed unfit for this very world. But he floundered, this could ruin me. For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion appeared in her eyes. It wasn't anger or pity. It was a kind of weary finality. You were ruined the day you decided that a person's worth was measured by the glamour on their arm and not the fire in their soul. She said, her voice dropping to a near whisper for his ears only. You didn't just overlook a person, Jonathan. You overlooked a world of potential because you were too busy admiring your own reflection. She held his gaze for a moment longer. He saw no lingering affection, no room for appeal. He was looking at a closed door, a locked vault. Goodbye, Jonathan, she said. And then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the New York night, leaving him standing alone in the cavernous empty lobby of the Marriott Marquis, a ghost at a feast that had, in the end, devoured him whole. The weekend was a descent into a special kind of hell. Jonathan returned not to his sleek penthouse, but to an empty mausoleum. The sprawling space, once a testament to his success, now felt cavernous and mocking. The floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline he had helped shape now seemed to showcase a world that was moving on without him. He didn't sleep. He paced. He drank. He replayed Catherine's words over and over in his head. You were too busy admiring your own reflection. On Saturday morning, the first domino fell. The New York Post ran a story on the gala. It wasn't on the society page. It was in the business section. The headline was brutal. Tech's newest billionaire, Catherine Miller, eclipses ex-husband at Innovators Gala. The article was a masterpiece of journalistic shade. It detailed Catherine's incredible success with Aqua Veritas, her powerful speech, and the palpable buzz around her. It mentioned Jonathan only in passing, referring to him as noted real estate developer Jonathan Davenport, who was also in attendance and lost the Innovator of the Year award to a rival. They even ran a photo, a stunning, powerful shot of Catherine at the podium, and a smaller inset photo of Jonathan at his table, looking pale and grim. Isabella was nowhere to be seen. The second domino fell an hour later. It was an email from the lead investor on his latest project, a high-end condo development in Soho. The email was brief and formal. Due to re-evaluating market positions and partner optics, they were exercising the exit clause in their contract. The unspoken message was clear: they were backing away from the guy who was publicly humiliated by his ex-wife. The guy who looked like a fool. In the world of high finance, perception was everything, and his perception had just been irrevocably tarnished. He tried calling Isabella. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He checked her Instagram. She had already deleted every single photo of them together. In their place was a new post, a picture of her looking pensive and beautiful at the gala bar, with the caption, "Sometimes you have to walk away to find your own path. #integrity, #new beginnings, #know your worth." She was co-opting Catherine's narrative, repositioning herself from a jilted mistress to an empowered woman. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The comments were full of praise. The third and most devastating domino fell on Monday morning. He was in his office, a space that felt more like a bunker when his secretary buzzed him. "Mr. Davenport, Arthur Vance is on line 1. He says it's urgent." Jonathan took a deep breath and picked up the phone. "Arthur, Jonathan." The lawyer's voice was clipped all business. "I've just come from a meeting at the mayor's office regarding Hudson Yards West." "And?" Jonathan asked, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. "And it's over," Arthur said bluntly. "The city has officially amended the development charter. Phase 2 now requires the integration of a next-generation zero-carbon water purification system. They even named the specific patented technology required, the H2 Onyx system." Jonathan felt the floor drop out from under him. "They can't do that. That's targeted. That's politics, Jonathan. The mayor gets a huge PR win by partnering with the city's hottest new green tech firm. The city gets a cutting-edge sustainable development. Everybody wins." "Everybody but me," Jonathan yelled into the phone. "I'm the lead developer. I have the contract." "You had the contract," Arthur corrected him. "You have 30 days to present a revised plan that incorporates Aqua Veritas technology. If you can't secure a partnership with them, the city will open the project to new bids from developers who can. You and I both know Ms. Miller is not going to sign a deal with you. You're out." He had been surgically removed from his own masterpiece. It was a hostile takeover orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. Catherine hadn't just embarrassed him, she had strategically dismantled his empire's cornerstone. She hadn't needed to scream or cause a scene. She had used the system, the very system of power and influence he worshipped against him, and she had done it better than he ever could. He hung up the phone, a strange numbness spreading through him. He looked out his office window at the distant skeleton of the Hudson Yards West development. It was his legacy, and now it would be hers. She would complete it, and it would be a monument to her genius, built on the ashes of his career. His phone buzzed again. A news alert from the Wall Street Journal. Aqua Veritas Technologies announces landmark partnership with New York City for Hudson Yards West development. Stock expected to soar. He scrolled through the article, his vision blurring. It was full of quotes from the mayor praising Catherine's vision and commitment to a better future. There was a quote from Catherine herself. "We believe in building smarter, more sustainable communities," she was quoted as saying. "This partnership isn't just about one project. It's about setting a new standard for urban development, one where corporate responsibility and technological innovation work hand in hand. We look forward to collaborating with a development partner who shares that vision." A development partner who shares that vision. Not him. They would bring in someone else. Someone like Michael Chen, the man who had won his award. He finally understood the depth of his miscalculation. He had thought he was leaving behind a simple, unambitious woman. He had failed to realize that the same quiet, relentless persistence she applied to her hobbies was a trait she could apply to anything, to building a company, to accumulating power, to executing a flawless, devastating revenge. He had thrown away a diamond, thinking it was a simple stone, and now that diamond was cutting him to pieces. The king was not just dethroned, his castle was being dismantled, brick by the queen he had banished, and he had no one to blame but himself. 3 months later, the New York autumn had arrived, painting the city in hues of gold and amber. For Jonathan Davenport, however, the world remained stubbornly grey. The fallout from the gala had been swift and total. The name Davenport was now synonymous with bad judgment. His company was hemorrhaging money and talent. Projects were stalled, investors were spooked, and the vultures were circling. He was forced to sell off assets at a fraction of their worth just to stay afloat. The penthouse was the first to go. He now lived in a respectable but soul-crushingly anonymous apartment on the Upper East Side. It was the kind of place successful dentists lived. It was a prison of beige walls and polite doormen. Every morning he would read the business section with a masochistic compulsion. Every day brought fresh news of Catherine's ascent. Aqua Veritas had gone public. The IPO was one of the most successful of the decade. Catherine Miller, the quiet chemist from Queens, was now officially one of the wealthiest women in the world. Her face was on the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "The Woman Who Will Save the World's Water." The article detailed her inspiring story, her brilliance, her vision. It mentioned her previous marriage in a single clinical sentence. A brief early marriage to a real estate developer ended in divorce 5 years ago, a period Miller refers to as her cocoon stage before her professional metamorphosis. He was a footnote, a cocoon, the husk she had shed to become a butterfly. He had tried to reach out. He sent letters through lawyers, carefully worded requests for a meeting. Not to beg for a piece of the Hudson Yards project, he knew that ship had sailed, and Michael Chen's firm had indeed been brought in as the new lead developer, but for something else. Absolution, maybe, a conversation, a chance to understand. His requests were met with a wall of professional silence. His letters were acknowledged by a junior associate at her company's legal department, and then never mentioned again. He was irrelevant, a piece of old correspondence to be filed away and forgotten. One crisp October afternoon, defeated and aimless, Jonathan found himself walking through Central Park. He was wearing an off-the-rack coat and simple trousers, a ghost of his former self. The swagger was gone, replaced by a permanent slump in his shoulders. And then he saw her. She was sitting on a bench near the reservoir, not surrounded by an entourage, but alone. She was dressed in simple jeans, a cashmere sweater, and a pair of sunglasses. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was watching a dog chase a frisbee on the lawn, a small, peaceful smile on her face. She looked happy, content. This was it. His chance. No lawyers, no security, just him and her. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, his heart pounding. He didn't know what he would say, but he had to say something. As he got closer, a man jogged up to her bench. It was Michael Chen. He was in running gear, and he leaned down and kissed her. Not a formal peck, but a familiar, loving kiss. He handed her a bottle of water, and she laughed a sound Jonathan hadn't heard in years. It was light and unburdened. They looked at each other with an easy intimacy, a partnership of equals. Jonathan froze. He felt like an intruder, a voyeur staring into a world he could never belong to. He saw it all in that one simple interaction. She hadn't just replaced him in business. She had replaced him in life. She had found the partner she deserved, someone who saw her, who shared her vision, who celebrated her brilliance instead of being threatened by it. He backed away slowly, unnoticed. The last vestiges of his anger and resentment dissolved, leaving only a vast, hollow emptiness. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was never truly about revenge for her. Her success wasn't about punishing him. His ruin was just a byproduct, a consequence of her simply choosing to live up to her own potential. Her triumph was the main story. His downfall was just the collateral damage. He turned and walked away, melting back into the anonymous crowds of the city. He was no longer Jonathan Davenport, the great developer. He was just a man who had once been married to Catherine Miller. He had held the future in his hands and let it slip through his fingers because he was too blind to see its worth. Catherine, meanwhile, took a sip of her water and leaned her head on Michael's shoulder, feeling the warmth of the autumn sun on her face. She didn't think about the gala or the penthouse or the man who was now walking away. She was thinking about a new water project in sub-Saharan Africa, about the schematics for her next innovation, about the dinner reservations she and Michael had for that evening. She was looking forward. Her past was finally completely where it belonged, behind her. 2 years passed. The name Jonathan Davenport, once a fixture in the glossy pages of real estate magazines, had faded into obscurity. His company had been dismantled and sold for parts. The story of his public downfall at the gala became a cautionary anecdote told over drinks in the boardrooms and bars he no longer frequented. For a year, Jonathan had drifted, living off the dwindling remnants of his fortune, a man hollowed out by failure. But a person cannot drift forever. Eventually, you either sink or you find a reason to swim. Jonathan, stripped of everything he thought defined him, found his reason in the one thing he had always genuinely known: construction. Not the art of the deal, not the branding, not the scalene-altering vision, but the simple, honest process of building things. He took a job as a site manager for a mid-sized, reputable construction firm. He traded his Tom Ford suits for steel-toed boots and a high-visibility vest. His penthouse was a distant memory. His home was now a small, functional one-bedroom apartment in a walk-up building in Astoria. He woke up when it was dark, drank bitter coffee from a thermos, and spent his days in the mud and dust coordinating schedules for concrete pours and electrical wiring. He was, for the first time in his adult life, anonymous. And in that anonymity, he found a strange sort of peace. The work was tangible. At the end of the day, he could point to a wall that hadn't been there that morning. It was real in a way his old life of projections and leveraged financing never had been. His current project was a large-scale community building in the Bronx, a state-of-the-art facility with classrooms, a health clinic, and a tech hub for underprivileged youth. It was a good project, one he felt a quiet pride in. He didn't know much about the funding, only that it came from a major philanthropic foundation. One Tuesday morning, the site was buzzing with an unusual energy. A delegation of VEPs was coming for a tour. Jonathan's job was simple: ensure the site was safe and that his crews didn't get in the way. He stood by the foundation, clipboard in hand, reviewing blueprints as a convoy of black cars pulled up. He barely glanced up. It wasn't his world anymore. He heard the site owner, Mr. O'Malley, fawning over the visitors. He heard a familiar voice, Michael Chen's, explaining the building's sustainable design features. Jonathan kept his head down, his hard hat pulled low. Then he heard her voice, clear, confident, and inquisitive. "Catherine. The load-bearing columns here," she was saying, "are they using the recycled composite steel we specified?" "Yes, Ms. Miller," O'Malley stammered eagerly. "Absolutely, the best in the business. Our site manager can attest to the quality." O'Malley looked around, flustered, and his eyes landed on Jonathan. "Davenport! A moment." Jonathan's heart stopped. It was one thing to see her from a distance in the park. It was another to be summoned before her on a construction site covered in a fine layer of dust. He walked over slowly, his boots heavy. He took off his hard hat out of instinctual respect. Their eyes met. Catherine's expression didn't change, but he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a momentary processing of an impossible situation. Michael Chen, standing beside her, stiffened almost imperceptibly, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. "Mr. Davenport is our site manager," O'Malley said, oblivious. "He can answer any technical questions." The silence stretched for a moment, thick and heavy. Jonathan could feel the curious stares of her entourage. "The steel composites are up to spec," Jonathan said, his voice hoarse but steady. He looked directly at Catherine. "The tensile strength tests were excellent. Your foundation is solid." He meant the building's foundation, but the words hung in the air with a deeper meaning. Catherine looked at him. Truly, looked at him for the first time since that night in the Marriott lobby. She saw the lines on his face, the calluses on his hands, the humility in his posture. There was no arrogance left, no trace of the king he once thought he was. He was just a man doing his job. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you, Mr. Davenport," she said, her tone professional, polite, and completely devoid of malice. "I appreciate the update. Please continue." And with that, the delegation moved on. The moment was over. Catherine and her new world swept past him, leaving him standing in the dust once more. But this time it felt different. There was no humiliation. There was no rage. He had faced her not as a failed rival or a bitter ex-husband, but as a competent worker, contributing to her vision. He was a small, functional part of the good she was putting into the world. He watched her walk away a titan in a world she had built with a good man at her side. And for the first time, he felt no envy, only a quiet, profound sense of closure. She was Catherine Miller, CEO and philanthropist. He was Jonathan Davenport, site manager. They were two different people living in two different worlds, and that was okay. He put his hard hat back on the plastic shell, feeling like a crown of a different sort, a crown of acceptance. He picked up his clipboard and turned back to the blueprints, to the solid, tangible work that awaited him. He had started his career trying to build an empire in the sky. He had finally found his footing and his peace by starting again from the ground floor. And so Jonathan Davenport's glittering world didn't just crack. It turned to dust, blown away by the winds of a change he never saw coming. His story serves as a powerful, real-world reminder that the greatest assets we can have are often the people we take for granted. He looked for value in glitter and gold, while true brilliance was sitting right across the dinner table waiting to be seen. Catherine's journey shows us that your worth is never determined by someone else's opinion. Her revenge wasn't loud or angry, it was simply her success. She didn't tear him down, she just built her own empire so high that he was left in its shadow. What do you think? Was this the ultimate karma, or should Catherine have confronted him more directly? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
What would you do if the man who shattered your heart, the man who called you an anchor, holding him back, decided to get married on the one day of the year that was sacred to you both? For Aurora Monroe, that day was October 12th, her wedding anniversary. The invitation wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war on her memory. But Declan Peterson made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed his ex-wife was still the broken woman he'd left behind. He had no idea she was about to RSVP in a way that would not only crash his wedding, but shatter his entire carefully constructed new world. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a catalogue for Italian leather goods and a bill from the architectural firm. It was thick, creamy cardstock, the kind that whispers of expense and occasion. Aurora Monroe ran a manicured finger over the embossed lettering, her heart giving a painful, familiar lurch. Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Miller request the pleasure of your company at the marriage of their daughter Sophie Miller to Mr. Declan Peterson. And there at the bottom, the date that felt like a deliberate poisoned dart, Saturday the 12th of October. Their anniversary. 5 years they had been married. 10 years they had been together. October 12th wasn't just a date. It was a cornerstone of her life, a day she had once believed was etched into the stars. Even after the divorce, a messy, brutal affair that had flayed her soul raw, the date remained sacrosanct. She'd spend it quietly, sometimes with her sister, sometimes alone, a day of somber reflection on the woman she used to be. Now Declan was taking that too. He wasn't just moving on, he was bulldozing the ruins of their shared history to build his new life on top of them. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, sounding foreign in the minimalist quiet of her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Of course he was. It was so quintessentially Declan, grandiose, selfish, and utterly thoughtless. The divorce had been 2 years ago. The words he'd used still echoed in her mind during her weaker moments. You're not ambitious enough, Aurora. You're comfortable. You're an anchor, and I'm a ship meant for the open sea. He had made her feel small, as if her dreams of building her interior design firm brick by painstaking brick were quaint hobbies compared to his vague, bombastic ambitions in the world of finance. He'd painted her as the reason his career hadn't skyrocketed, the quiet domestic weight holding back his ascent. The irony was so thick, she could choke on it. In the 2 years since he'd cut the anchor, her firm, Monroe Interiors, had exploded. She'd landed a feature in Architectural Digest, secured contracts with 2 boutique hotel chains, and was now in negotiations to design a series of luxury lofts in Dubai. She wasn't just successful, she was thriving in a way she never could have when a part of her energy was constantly being diverted to soothe his fragile ego. She dropped the invitation on the marble island, the sharp clack echoing in the room. Her phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Maxwell. He was standing on a tarmac in Geneva, a breathtaking backdrop of the Swiss Alps behind him, grinning into the camera. The text read, "Closed the deal. The prototype is officially ours. Celebrating with fondue. Wish you were here. Home tomorrow. J." A genuine smile touched Aurora's lips, the first one since opening the mail. Maxwell Lancaster, the man who had walked into her life 6 months ago like a calm, steady sunrise after a long, violent storm. He was a tech billionaire, a fact he rarely mentioned. And that was the least interesting thing about him. He was kind, fiercely intelligent, and looked at her not as an anchor, but as the sea itself, vast, powerful, and beautiful. He celebrated her successes with more enthusiasm than she did listening for hours as she detailed fabric swatches and lighting schematics. With him, she felt seen, not just observed. She picked up the invitation again, the anger returning, but this time it was different. It wasn't the hollow ache of a victim. It was a cold, clarifying fire. Declan didn't know who she was anymore. He still saw her as the woman who cried for a week after he left, the woman who had to sell their shared brownstone because she couldn't bear the memories. He was flaunting his new life, his new bride, Sophie Miller, a socialite whose father owned half of Wall Street. Aurora noted with a cynical pang on their day, assuming she would shrink wounded into the shadows. He was assuming she was still anchored in their past. That night she couldn't sleep. She paced the length of her apartment, the glittering panorama of New York City, a silent witness to her turmoil. The city had been their playground. They'd had their first date at a small jazz club in the village. He'd proposed on the Bow Bridge in Central Park on a crisp autumn afternoon, just like this one. His ghost was everywhere. For 2 years, she had worked to exorcise him. She'd poured her pain, her anger, her resilience into her work, and it had paid off. She had built a fortress around her heart with steel and glass and success. But this invitation was a battering ram threatening to breach the walls. Going was out of the question. It was masochistic. It was handing Declan the victory, showing up alone, a spectre at his feast. It would confirm every condescending, pitying glance from his family and friends who had always thought he was too good for her. Not going felt like defeat. It felt like hiding. It felt like letting him have the final say on what October 12th meant. It would be his wedding day forever. The thought was unbearable. She found herself in her home office, scrolling through the social media profile of Sophie Miller. It was a curated gallery of perfection. Skiing in Aspen, yachting in Monaco, charity galas at the Met. Sophie was blonde, beautiful, and radiated the effortless confidence of someone who had never wanted for anything. In one photo, Declan stood beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. He wore a tailored suit, a smug, triumphant smile on his face. He looked like he'd won. Aurora's finger hovered over a picture of the engaged couple, a professionally shot photo with Sophie's enormous diamond ring prominently displayed. The caption penned by Sophie read, "I can't wait to marry my king and build our empire together. Declan Peterson, you are my everything." His empire, Aurora thought, with a humorless smile. Declan had always talked about his empire, a vague and glorious future that was always just around the corner, always impeded by some external factor, the market, his boss, his supposedly unsupportive wife. The fire within her burned hotter. It wasn't about the man anymore. She felt nothing, for Declan, but a dull, clinical revulsion. It was about the narrative. He had written the story of their ending, casting her as the villain, the dead weight. He was now writing a new story, a triumphant sequel on the very day that defined their shared history. She would not allow it. She would not be a footnote in the story of Declan Peterson. When Maxwell's car pulled up to her building the next evening, she was waiting. He stepped out, a tall, commanding presence, in a simple grey sweater and jeans that probably cost more than her first car. He enveloped her in a hug, his scent a comforting mix of expensive cologne and the clean, crisp air of the Alps still clinging to his coat. "You seem tense," he said, his perceptive blue eyes searching hers. "Everything okay?" Inside, she handed him the invitation. He read it, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. He looked from the cardstock to the date, then back to her face. He saw the storm in her eyes. "The 12th, he said, his voice low, "of all the days in the year." "It's a power move," Aurora said, her voice tight. "It's a final twist of the knife to make sure I know he won." "And what do you want to do about it?" Maxwell asked. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell her to ignore it or that Declan wasn't worth her energy. He knew she was past that. This was something different. "I was going to throw it away. I was going to book a spa day, fly to Paris, anything to pretend it isn't happening," she admitted. "But it feels like letting him win. It feels like I'm still letting him dictate my life, even in his absence." She looked at Maxwell, at his calm, unwavering face. "He thinks I'm still the person he left. He thinks I'm alone, struggling, a comfortable little designer. He has no idea who I am now." A slow smile spread across Maxwell's face. It was the smile he got when he was about to solve a complex coding problem or outmaneuver a corporate rival. So he said, his eyes glinting with a shared spark of rebellion, "Why don't we show him the idea once spoken aloud took on a life of its own? It shifted from a wild, vengeful fantasy into a tangible, strategic plan." Maxwell's question, "Why don't we show him?" wasn't just rhetorical. It was an offer, a key to a door Aurora hadn't even realized was there. "What do you mean, show him?" she asked, a tremor of excitement running through her. "Crash his wedding, Maxwell. That's insane. It's dramatic and petty." "Is it?" he countered, leaning against the kitchen island, the picture of calm audacity. "Or is it simply correcting a narrative? He's telling a story about you to his new family, to his friends, to himself. A story where you were the weak link. You have the opportunity to present a revised edition." He picked up the invitation again. "Blackwood Manor. Quaint, old money aesthetic. An hour north of the city. We could drive." He paused, a theatrical glint in his eye. "Or we could make an entrance that's a little less terrestrial." Aurora's heart started beating faster. She knew what he was suggesting. Maxwell owned a fleet of private aircraft through a subsidiary of his company, Lancaster Aerospace. To him, a jet was like a car. "You want to fly to his wedding?" she breathed. "The manor has a heliport, but it's small, barely fit for a Bell 429, Maxwell mused, already scrolling on his phone. "However, there's a private airfield less than 10 miles away. ample runway for the G700. We could be there wheels down in under 20 minutes from Teterboro. The Gulfstream G700, Maxwell's newest acquisition, a flying masterpiece of engineering and luxury that he often called his sky office. The thought was so audacious, so utterly beyond the realm of anything Declan could possibly conceive of, that Aurora laughed, a real deep laugh that broke the tension in her chest. He would have a complete and total meltdown, she said, the image flashing in her mind. That's a potential side effect, Maxwell said, with a straight face. But that's not the point. The point, Aurora, is for you to walk into that place, not as Declan Peterson's sad ex-wife, but as Aurora Monroe, the woman you are today. Successful, happy, and with a man who sees you as a supernova, not an anchor. It's not about revenge. It's about closure, on your terms. His words sliced through her remaining hesitation. He was right. This wasn't about being petty. It was about reclaiming her own story. It was about showing up for herself, proving to the one person who mattered her that the ghosts of the past had no power. Okay, she said the word, feeling momentous. Let's do it. The next 10 days were a whirlwind of focused preparation. It felt less like planning a party crash and more like a military operation with Maxwell as the general and Aurora as the commander on the ground. First, the dress. Aurora knew it couldn't be just any dress. It had to be a statement. She didn't want a revenge dress in the classic sense, not something overtly sexy or attention-seeking. She needed something that spoke of power, elegance, and untouchable grace. She called in a favor with a designer friend in Milan, a woman whose couture gowns were usually reserved for red carpets and royalty. She explained the situation vaguely at first. I have an event. I need to make an impression. What kind of impression, the designer Isabella had asked over a video call. Like I own the world, but I'm too busy to be bothered with the paperwork, Aurora replied. Isabella had cackled with delight. Say no more, my darling. I have the perfect creation. 3 days later, a custom-fitted gown arrived by courier. It was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light. It was cut with architectural precision, a high neckline, long sleeves, and a column silhouette that draped over her body like liquid moonlight. The only embellishment was a cascade of tiny diamond-like crystals scattered across one shoulder, as if she had brushed against a nebula. It was breathtaking. It was perfect. Next, Maxwell handled the logistics. He arranged for the jet, the pilots, and a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom to be waiting at the private airfield near Blackwood Manor. Subtlety in motion, he called it. Are you sure you want to do this? Aurora asked him one evening as they sat on her balcony sharing a bottle of wine. A sliver of doubt had crept in. It's your time, your resources. It's my baggage. Maxwell took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. Let me tell you something about my world, Aurora. It's filled with people who want something from me. My money, my connections, my name. It's a constant transaction. With you, it's different. You want my time. You want my heart. You let me into your world, your baggage included. Helping you close this chapter isn't a chore. It's a privilege. Besides, he added with a wink, I've always wanted to see a narcissist's face when his carefully constructed reality implodes. I'll bring popcorn. His unwavering support was her armor. With him by her side, she felt invincible. The day before the wedding, a package arrived for her. It was a small, velvet box from Maxwell. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a necklace. It was a single, impossibly large, pear-cut sapphire suspended from a delicate platinum chain. It was the exact shade of her dress. Her breath caught. It was a museum-quality piece. Maxwell, this is too much. He called her the moment he knew she'd received it. It's not too much, he said, his voice warm. It's a reminder. That man gave you costume jewelry and empty promises. I just wanted you to wear a piece of the sky. On the morning of October the 12th, Aurora woke up, not with the familiar dread, but with a strange electric calm. There was no sadness, no painful nostalgia. It was just a date. A day for a new memory to be forged. She spent the morning at her office, signing off on the Dubai project drafts. Her focus was sharp, her mind clear. She was Aurora Monroe, CEO of a thriving company. Declan Peterson was a footnote from a previous chapter. By late afternoon, the transformation began. A hair and makeup artist recommended by Isabella worked silently and efficiently. Her hair was swept up into a sleek, intricate chignon. Her makeup was understated but striking, emphasizing her eyes, making them look like polished obsidian. When she finally slipped into the midnight blue gown, she hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. This was not the girl who had married Declan Peterson. This was not the woman who had crumbled when he left. This was someone else entirely. Someone forged in fire. Maxwell arrived looking impossibly handsome in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. He stopped dead in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over her. Aurora, he breathed, his voice filled with genuine awe. You are transcendent. He held out his hand, and as she took it, he fastened the sapphire necklace around her neck. The cool weight of it against her skin was a final click of a lock, sealing her resolve. Ready to go? He asked. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze in the mirror. Ready. The flight to Teterboro was silent and swift. As they boarded the Gulf Stream, the sheer scale of the moment hit her. The cabin was larger than her first apartment, all cream leather and polished mahogany. The flight attendant offered them champagne. As the jet engines spooled up with a powerful rising whine, Aurora looked out the window at the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. She thought of Declan down on the ground, probably adjusting his tie, basking in the adoration of his guests, completely oblivious. He thought he was the ship meant for the open sea. He had no idea a hurricane was coming. Blackwood Manor was exactly as Aurora had pictured it, a sprawling Tudor-style estate that tried very hard to project an air of old-world aristocracy. Manicured lawns, ivy-covered stone walls, and a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. As the Rolls-Royce Phantom glided silently up the drive, Aurora could see the main house ablaze with light, the cheerful sounds of a string quartet drifting through the crisp autumn air. Guests in their finest attire mingled on the flagstone patio, champagne flutes in hand. It was a scene of carefully curated elegance, tasteful, expensive, and utterly predictable. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Just as the sun began to set. Maxwell had timed their arrival for 6:15 p.m., perfectly positioned to intercept the post-ceremony, pre-reception cocktail hour. It was the moment of maximum social visibility. Their approach, however, had begun 10 minutes earlier. The first sign that something was amiss in the world of Blackwood Manor was a sound. It started as a low, distant hum, a vibration felt more than heard. It wasn't the familiar thwump-thwump of a helicopter, but a deeper, more powerful roar that seemed to come from the sky itself. The string quartet faltered mid-Mozart. Guests paused their conversations, tilting their heads, their brows furrowed in confusion. The sound grew swelling from a hum to a full-throated roar that rattled the antique window panes and vibrated through the soles of their expensive shoes. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated power. Heads turned, eyes scanning the darkening sky. And then they saw it. Banking gracefully over the Hudson River Valley, its landing lights cutting through the twilight, was the sleek, unmistakable shape of a Gulfstream G700. It was impossibly large, impossibly close. It flew with a majestic, predatory grace, its silver fuselage catching the last rays of the setting sun. It was so out of context for this quiet, bucolic setting that it felt like a scene from a movie. The jet didn't land at the manor, of course. It continued its elegant descent towards the private airfield a few miles away, its thunderous passage a herald of something to come. The whispers started immediately. "What on earth was that? Did you see the size of it? Whose jet is that? Does someone here know the president?" Inside the main hall, Declan Peterson was at the peak of his glory. He had just exchanged vows with Sophie Miller. He was now officially connected to one of New York's wealthiest families. His financial troubles were a thing of the past. He stood with his new wife, his hand possessively on the small of her back, accepting congratulations. His mother, Margaret Peterson, a woman with a perpetually pinched face and disapproving eyes, hovered nearby, beaming with pride for the first time in years. "Such a wonderful ceremony," Declan, a guest, gushed. "And Sophie, you look radiant." Declan's smile was wide and practiced. "Thank you. We're just so thrilled to start our life together. It's a new beginning, a real ascent." He loved that word. Ascent. It was then that the low growl of a high-performance engine replaced the fading roar of the jet. The Rolls-Royce Phantom, black as a starless night, pulled to a stop at the manor's grand entrance. It was a vehicle that commanded attention not through noise, but through its sheer imposing presence. A valet, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and panic, scrambled to open the passenger door. The first thing the guests on the patio saw was a leg, long, elegant, clad in a sheer stocking, and ending in a stiletto that looked like it was carved from obsidian. Then Aurora Monroe emerged. A collective, hushed intake of breath seemed to suck the air from the patio. She rose from the car, not like a person, but like an event. The midnight blue gown flowed around her, the crystals on her shoulder glittering like a captured constellation. The sapphire at her throat was a point of deep, cold fire. Her hair was a sculpted masterpiece, her face serene and unreadable. She didn't look angry or vengeful. She looked like she was bored with gods. She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the stunned crowd with a look of cool, mild appraisal. Then Maxwell stepped out from the other side. If Aurora was the queen of the night, he was her king. The Tom Ford tuxedo fit him like a second skin. He radiated an aura of quiet, unassailable confidence. He wasn't handsome in the flashy, desperate way Declan was. He was handsome in the way a mountain is handsome, solid, timeless, and powerful. He walked to Aurora's side and offered her his arm, his movements economical and precise. Together, they looked less like wedding guests and more like they had arrived to purchase the entire estate as a weekend getaway. The whispers on the patio turned into frantic, urgent murmurs. "Is that Aurora, Declan's ex-wife? My God, I didn't even recognize her. Who is that with her? He looks important. That dress, that necklace must have cost more than the wedding." Declan had just raised a glass of champagne to his lips when he saw the commotion at the door. He turned, a slight annoyance on his face, expecting a late-arriving cousin. His eyes fell on the couple framed in the grand entryway. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the sudden silence. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly pale mask. His jaw went slack. It was a total system failure. His mind simply could not process the data it was receiving. Aurora, that was Aurora, the comfortable, mousy anchor of a woman he had so righteously discarded. And who the hell was the man with her who looked like he could buy and sell everyone in the room? Before his first drink was finished, Sophie, his new bride, followed his gaze. "Declan, darling, what is it?" Her eyes landed on Aurora. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, then a gathering storm of feminine indignation. What is she doing here? Aurora and Maxwell began to move, gliding through the parted sea of guests with an unhurried grace. They weren't crashing. They were gracing the event with their presence. Aurora's eyes finally found Declan's across the crowded room. She gave him a small, polite smile, a smile one might give to a vaguely familiar waiter. They reached the shell-shocked groom, the broken glass crunching under Maxwell's impeccable shoes. Ignoring the furious glare of the bride and the horrified gasp of her new mother-in-law, Aurora stopped directly in front of her ex-husband. She tilted her head, her expression one of pleasant curiosity. "Declan," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence of the room. "What a lovely party! You should have told me you were having one." The silence that followed Aurora's words was thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic internal calculations happening behind Declan's eyes. He looked from Aurora's impossibly serene face to Maxwell's cool, observant gaze, and then back to the shattered champagne flute at his feet. It was a perfect metaphor for his state of mind. His first instinct was aggression, the cornered animal's response. "Aurora, what the hell are you doing here? You weren't invited." His voice was louder than he intended, a raw, panicked edge to it. Aurora raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Oh, I must have been mistaken." She feigned a look at the invitation she wasn't holding. "My apologies. We were in the neighborhood and saw the lights. We can certainly leave if we're intruding." It was a masterful stroke. She was offering him an out, a way to de-escalate, but it was an out that required him to publicly ask her to leave her who looked like a goddess, accompanied by a man who radiated influence. To do so would make him look petty and insecure. Maxwell, who hadn't said a word, simply watched Declan, his expression unreadable, but his presence immense. He was a silent checkmate on the board. Sophie, the bride, had no such compunctions. "I think you should," she hissed, stepping forward. Her white dress was a stark contrast to Aurora's dark silk. "This is my wedding day. You have no right to be here." Aurora finally turned her gaze to Sophie, and for the first time, a flicker of something not pity, but perhaps a detached empathy, entered her eyes. "Sophie, isn't it congratulations? He's all yours." The words were simple, but the delivery was devastating. She said it with the weary magnanimity of someone giving away a used piece of furniture. The insult was so subtle, so elegantly delivered, that Sophie was left momentarily speechless, unsure of how to even process it. Before Declan could muster a coherent response, his mother, Margaret Peterson, swooped in. Margaret had spent years perfecting her particular brand of condescending disapproval, and she had always directed the full force of it at Aurora. "Aurora, I knew you had no class, but this is a new low." Margaret spat, her voice a venomous whisper. "To show up here trying to ruin your ex-husband's happiness, it's pathetic." This was the moment Aurora had dreaded, the confrontation with the woman who had made her feel inadequate for a decade. But the old fear was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. "Hello, Margaret," Aurora said, her tone even and cool. "You look well." Anger is clearly a preservative. She glanced at Maxwell. Darling, this is Margaret Peterson, Declan's mother. She was instrumental in the success of our marriage. Maxwell extended a hand. A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Peterson. Maxwell Lancaster. The name landed in the charged atmosphere like a dropped anvil. Lancaster, as in Lancaster Aerospace, as in Lancaster Innovations, as in one of the 10 richest self-made men under 40 in the world. Even Margaret, in her bubble of suburban snobbery, knew that name. Her jaw, which had been set in a line of righteous fury, went slack. Her eyes widened, flicking from Maxwell's hand to his face, and then to Aurora, who was now linked with him. The equation did not compute. Margaret's hand, which had been clenched at her side, weakly rose and shook Maxwell's. Mr. Lancaster, I don't understand. Aurora and I are together, Maxwell stated simply, leaving no room for doubt. He then turned his gaze back to Declan. Peterson, we don't want to cause a scene. We were simply passing by. Perhaps my fiancé and I could have a celebratory drink with the happy couple and be on our way, fiancé. The word detonated in the center of the room. Aurora felt Maxwell squeeze her arm gently. They had discussed this. It was the final, unassailable piece of the narrative. She wasn't just dating a billionaire, she was marrying him. The sapphire around her neck wasn't just a gift, it was a promise. Declan stared his face, a kaleidoscope of shocked jealousy and pure, unadulterated rage. Fiancé, the woman he had cast off as dead weight, was engaged to Maxwell Lancaster. It was a cosmic injustice. It defied the laws of the universe as he understood them, a universe that was supposed to revolve around him. The guests who had been trying their best to pretend they weren't listening were now abuzz with the revelation. The story was rewriting itself in real time. This wasn't a pathetic ex trying to spoil a wedding. This was a phoenix, risen from ashes Declan didn't even know he'd created, arriving with a dragon in tow. Trapped Declan had no choice but to play the gracious host. Of course, he choked out, forcing a smile that was more of a grimace. Let's all have a drink. He led them towards a small private study off the main hall, away from the prying eyes of the guests. The four of them, a groom in turmoil, a furious bride, a serene ex-wife, and her billionaire fiancé, entered the room. The air was thick with unspoken history and imminent conflict. Declan poured himself a large scotch and downed half of it in one gulp. He finally found his voice, a low accusatory growl directed at Aurora. This is a game to you, isn't it? Showing up like this with him. He gestured dismissively at Maxwell. To rub my face in it. Your face, Aurora asked, genuinely curious. Declan, why would you assume my life still revolves around you? I came here tonight to close a door. You chose to have your wedding on October 12th. You must have known I'd see the invitation. Did you expect me to sit at home and cry? Is that the role you assigned me? I expected you to have some decency, he shot back. And was it decent to tell me I was an anchor? She replied, her voice dropping, losing its public coolness, and taking on a sharper, more personal edge. Was it decent to dismantle my self-worth so you could walk away guilt-free? I spent years believing you, Declan. Believing I was the reason you weren't soaring. It was the truth he insisted, his desperation making him reckless. Look at you now. You only manage this. He waved a hand at her dress, her necklace, because you latched onto someone richer. It's the same thing. You're just a more expensive anchor now. It was a fatal mistake. The insult was so crude so revealing of his own transactional worldview that it hung in the air, ugly and pathetic. Before Aurora could even respond, Maxwell stepped forward slightly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Mr. Peterson Maxwell began his voice a quiet, lethal calm. You seem to be under a few misapprehensions. When I met Aurora, she was already the CEO of a multi-million-dollar design firm that she built from the ground up with her own talent and grit. She had already secured the Dubai contracts that I assure you are worth more than this entire estate. I am not the source of her success. I am merely the man lucky enough to be by her side. You, on the other hand— Maxwell paused, letting the silence stretch. He gave Declan a slow, deliberate, head-to-toe look of appraisal, the kind one gives to a faulty piece of equipment. I've seen your file, Maxwell continued, his voice dropping even lower. When Aurora mentioned your name, my security team did a routine background check. It's standard procedure for anyone who enters our lives. The debt from your failed crypto ventures, the margin calls you barely met by borrowing against your parents' retirement fund. Your ascent in finance seems to have been more of a free fall. Declan's face went from pale to ashen. He looked like he'd been physically struck. You have no right. Don't talk to me about rights. Maxwell cut him off, the steel in his voice now unmistakable. You left a woman like Aurora, and you tried to break her spirit on the way out. Now you stand here in a suit probably paid for by your father-in-law, in a venue paid for by your father-in-law, about to accept a job you didn't earn from your father-in-law, and you have the audacity to call her an anchor. Every word was a perfectly aimed shot. Sophie, who had been watching with righteous anger, now had a flicker of confusion and doubt in her eyes. She looked at Declan, then at Maxwell, then back at Declan, searching his face for a denial. She found none. She only saw the panicked, guilty sweat beading on his forehead. The first crack in the facade of her perfect king had appeared, and it was starting to spread. The silence in the study was no longer just tense. It was suffocating. Maxwell's words hung in the air, each one a damning indictment that stripped away Declan's carefully constructed persona. Declan stood exposed not as a titan of industry, but as a desperate man in a rented suit. Sophie was the first to break the silence. Her voice was small, uncertain, a stark contrast to her earlier fury. Declan, what is he talking about? What debt? Declan rounded on her, his panic curdling into desperate anger. He's lying. Sophie, can't you see what this is? She's brought him here to ruin our day, to plant these lies. But his denial was weak, his eyes shifty. He couldn't meet her gaze. He couldn't meet anyone's. Aurora watched him, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. The anger she had held on to for so long was dissolving, replaced by a cold, clear pity. He wasn't the formidable man who had crushed her spirit. He was just a boy in a man's body, terrified of being found out. It's not a lie, is it, Declan? She said softly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. I remember the late nights, the frantic phone calls you tried to hide. I remember you selling off the stocks my grandfather left me, telling me it was for a guaranteed investment. I just never put it all together. I believed you when you said it was my fault, that my lack of vision was stressing you out. She took a step closer, her voice remaining low and steady, a stark contrast to his unraveling composure. The story you told me about me being an anchor, that was never the truth. The truth is your ship was already sinking, wasn't it? You weren't cutting an anchor. You were jumping onto the nearest lifeboat. She glanced at Sophie, whose hand had flown to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning horror. The lifeboat had a name. "No," Declan snarled, cornered. He turned back to Aurora, his face contorted with a venomous resentment. "You want to talk about the truth? You were never satisfied. You were always pushing your little design business, your little projects. You should have been supporting me, my vision. If you had just been the wife I needed, none of this would have happened." It was his last, desperate gambit, blame the victim. But the words, once so powerful, were now hollow and pathetic. Maxwell let out a short, mirthless laugh. "The wife you needed? You mean the financier you didn't have? Mrs. Peterson," he said, turning his attention briefly to Margaret, who was frozen by the door, her face a mask of disbelief. "You must be proud." But the final devastating blow didn't come from Maxwell or Aurora. It came from Sophie. Her initial shock had hardened into a cold, terrifying clarity. The little inconsistencies she had overlooked, the vague answers Declan gave about his business, his eagerness to have her father handle all their finances, it all clicked into place. The man she had just married wasn't a king building an empire. He was a refugee seeking asylum from his own failures. "My father," Sophie said, her voice trembling but clear. "The vice president position at his firm. The one he offered you as a wedding gift. Was that part of the deal, Declan?" Declan's face crumpled. The fight went out of him, replaced by a desperate, pleading look. "Sophie, baby, listen to me. It wasn't like that. I love you. I fell in love with you and your father just... He saw my potential. He wanted to help." "Help you?" Sophie's voice rose, laced with hysteria. "Help you by paying off your debts? Was that it was I, the bailout package? Was our marriage a business transaction?" "No, of course not," he pleaded, reaching for her. She recoiled as if his touch were toxic. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore." Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. That jet that flew over here, all those whispers from the guests, they were all looking at me, pitying me, the stupid rich girl who bought herself a husband. The raw, ugly truth of her words hung in the air. Declan had no response. His silence was a confession. This was the moment Aurora had unknowingly been waiting for. Not a moment of revenge, but of complete and utter vindication. It wasn't about her being better off. It was about the fundamental lie of their breakup being exposed. She hadn't failed him. He had failed himself, and he had used her as a scapegoat. With a quiet grace, she turned to leave. Her purpose there was finished. The door was not just closed, it was sealed, the lock turned, the key dissolved. As she reached the door, she paused beside the sobbing bride. For a moment, she saw not the snooty socialite, but another woman who had been deceived by Declan's charm. On impulse, she spoke, her voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a quiet finality. "For what it's worth," Aurora said, "I don't think you're stupid. I think you just believed him. I did too, for a very long time." Sophie looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting Aurora's. In that moment, there was a flash of understanding between two women who had occupied the same space in a man's dishonest world. Then Aurora and Maxwell were gone, stepping out of the suffocating study and back into the main hall. The string quartet had resumed, playing a brave but futile attempt to restore normalcy. But the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. The guests fell silent again as Aurora and Maxwell passed their expressions, a mixture of awe, pity, and frantic excitement. They were witnesses to a legend in the making. They didn't look back as they exited the manor. They didn't need to hear the shouting that erupted from the study. They didn't need to see Sophie rip the veil from her hair. or see Declan's mother finally comprehending the monumental fraud her son had perpetrated. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away from Blackwood Manor, Aurora looked at its reflection in the side mirror. A house of lies, ablaze with light, beginning to crumble from the inside out. She felt no joy, no schadenfreude. She just felt light. The anchor wasn't him. It had been the story he'd made her believe, and now she was free of it. The ride back to the private airfield was silent, but it was a comfortable, shared silence. Aurora leaned her head against the plush leather of the Rolls-Royce, the lights of passing cars painting fleeting patterns across Maxwell's stoic profile. The adrenaline was beginning to subside, leaving in its wake a profound and bone-deep sense of peace. The G700 was waiting for them on the tarmac, a beacon of otherworldly power in the quiet darkness of the countryside. As they ascended the stairs and the cabin door sealed shut, with a soft hiss, it felt like they were leaving the entire messy terrestrial world behind. Once airborne, the lights of the Hudson Valley spread out below them like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Aurora could just make out a cluster of lights that was Blackwood Manor, a tiny, insignificant speck in the vast darkness. "Are you okay?" Maxwell asked, his hand covering hers. "I am," she said, and she was surprised by the depth of her own sincerity. "I'm better than okay. For 2 years, I've been carrying this weight, this narrative that I was less than, that I wasn't enough. I thought seeing him again would hurt. I thought seeing him happy would break me." She looked out the window at the shrinking lights below. But he wasn't happy, he was terrified, and I wasn't broken. I was free. She turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but they were not tears of sadness. "Thank you, Maxwell. Not for the jet, or the dress, or the necklace. Thank you for giving me the support to go back there and find myself again." He brought her hand to his lips. "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have, Aurora. I just cleared the runway." They didn't talk about Declan for the rest of the flight. They talked about the future. They planned a trip to Kyoto to see the cherry blossoms in the spring. He told her about a new philanthropic foundation he was starting for STEM education for girls, and her eyes lit up as she immediately started sketching ideas for the foundation's headquarters on a cocktail napkin. They were two people building something real, looking forward, not back. The aftermath of their visit to Blackwood Manor became the stuff of legend in New York society circles. The story pieced together from the whispers of guests and the loud, furious arguments that followed their departure spread like wildfire. The wedding, for all intents and purposes, ended the moment Aurora and Maxwell left. Sophie Miller, in a spectacular display of wrath, had called her father from the study. The conversation was reportedly short and brutally effective. The vice president position was rescinded. The financial safety net was yanked away. The marriage, not even 3 hours old, was over. Sophie left with her parents that night, leaving a humiliated Declan to face his stunned guests and his aghast mother alone in the monument to his failed ambitions. The annulment was swift and merciless. A few weeks later, Aurora saw a small piece in a business gossip column. Declan Peterson had been forced to declare bankruptcy. His parents had sold their home to cover the debts he had accrued against it. He had fallen from a height that had only ever existed in his own imagination. Aurora felt nothing. It was like reading about a stranger. One crisp December evening, she and Maxwell were walking through Central Park. Snow had just begun to fall, dusting the trees and muffling the sounds of the city. They stopped on the Bow Bridge, the same spot where Declan had proposed to her a lifetime ago. She had once avoided this place, this ghost-filled landmark of her past. But tonight, standing here with Maxwell's arm wrapped around her, the cold air on her cheeks, it was just a bridge. A beautiful bridge in a beautiful city. "You know," she said, looking at the soft flakes landing on his coat. "He proposed to me here." Maxwell looked at her, his expression gentle. "Does it bother you to be here?" She shook her head, a genuine smile on her face. "No, it's just a memory, and it's not the most important one I have of this place anymore." He smiled back, pulling her closer. "Good, because I was hoping to make a new one." And there, on the same spot where her old life had been promised, Maxwell Lancaster got down on one knee in the falling snow and asked Aurora Monroe to be his wife. This time, there were no illusions, no empires, no grand ambitions. There was just a man and a woman grounded in truth, love, and a respect so deep it was the foundation of their world. She said yes, of course. Her answer was as quiet and sure as the falling snow, a promise of a future that wasn't about ascending, but about being truly, deeply, and unshakably home. Aurora's story isn't just about a dramatic wedding crash. It's about rewriting your own narrative. It's about realizing that the people who try to define you are often just projecting their own failures and insecurities. She didn't need a billionaire or a private jet to be powerful. She already was. The grand entrance was just her finally choosing to see herself the way the world was about to. Her real victory wasn't Declan's downfall, but her own liberation from a story that was never truly hers. What did you think of Aurora's ultimate power move? Have you ever had a moment where you had to take back your own story from someone else? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story of strength and vindication resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their past does not define them, and make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next real-life drama we have in store.